In the icy wilderness, she found him, a freezing wolf chained to a tree. Her decision to save the animal was desperate. But what happened next, and who emerged from the shadows of the forest, will shock you. This story isn't just about rescue, it's about a mystery soaked in blood and ancient horror. Before we continue, let us know which city you're watching from. We're always curious to learn where our viewers are tuning in from. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, it motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Now, let's begin. The icy breath of the north had gripped the taiga in a deathly hold. Alya was making her way through the snowy debris. Every step echoed with a dull crunch beneath her boots, and that sound seemed like the only sign of life in the shrouded silence of the forest. The Arctic frost, the relentless kind, bit down to the bone, drawing out every last trace of warmth from under her layered clothing. She pulled her fur-lined parka collar tighter, but the cold air still found its way in, burning her face and making her eyes water. The twilight, thick and viscous like tar, had already begun to seep between the trunks of ancient pines, heralding the arrival of the long polar night. Alya hadn't planned to stay this long. Her expedition, initially intended as a short trip to collect samples of rare moss found only in the far north, had been delayed by the sudden turn in weather. Now, with the blizzard having eased somewhat, she hurried toward her snowmobile hidden on the edge of the forest. But something made her stop, frozen, turning into another ice statue among the white silence. A sound, faint, barely audible, but completely alien in this kingdom of frost. It wasn't the wind in the treetops, nor the creak of frozen branches, nor the cracking of icy wood. It was breathing, ragged, heavy, compressed, as if something enormous and powerful were struggling desperately for each breath of freezing air, but its strength was fading. Alya's heart dropped, then began to pound rapidly in her chest and temples. Instinctively, she reached for the heavy hunting knife in its leather sheath on her belt, a gift from an old Evenki guide on past expeditions. All around, as far as the eye could see, there was only a snowy desert bristling with black tree needles. Not a soul. Yet the feeling of an unseen presence became almost tangible. It pressed down on her, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She took a few cautious steps in the direction of the sound, trying to step quietly, though the snow crust crunched underfoot. Beyond a drift of snow-covered fallen trees, she saw it. Or rather, at first, it was just a dark spot, an indistinct shape barely moving against the white snow and the gray bark of a massive pine. As she drew closer, pushing past the inner resistance and the rising cold horror, Alya gasped and immediately covered her mouth with her hand. The scene that opened before her was monstrous. A massive gray wolf, truly a forest beast from ancient times, was chained tightly to the pine. Thick tar-soaked ropes, more like ship cables, bit deeply into its powerful limbs, swelling them to a bluish hue. Around its neck gleamed a heavy steel chain, dulled in the dim northern light, one end wrapped around the tree and secured with some kind of knot, or even a lock. The chain dug into the thick fur, and Alya saw dark, crusted blood beneath it. The wolf didn't move, only a deep shiver passed through its emaciated body. Its breathing was as ragged and weak as she had heard from afar. Tiny icicles hung from its long, sharp muzzle, frozen breath, possibly even frozen saliva. Its eyes, usually bright yellow and predatory, were now half-closed, with a dull glint not of rage or aggression, but of boundless exhaustion, pain, and a deep, all-consuming terror of a creature resigned to death. Who could do such a thing? What kind of monster in human form was capable of such cruelty? Alya looked around frantically. There were no fresh human footprints, only a few old, snow-covered tracks fading into the distance. The beast had clearly been abandoned here to die, a slow, torturous death from cold, hunger, and wounds. He didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth, didn't try to escape. It was as if he had accepted his horrible fate, and that resignation made it all the more haunting. Alya slowly, very slowly, dropped to her knees a few steps from the wolf, trying not to make any sudden moves so as not to frighten him further. The wolf barely lifted his heavy head and looked at her. Their eyes met. In that short moment, Alya saw not just animal fear in those dark, dilated pupils, but something else, a silent plea for help, a flicker of some strange, almost human sorrow. She stayed on her knees, unable to approach but equally unable to leave. Every detail of this horrific scene etched itself into her memory with painful clarity. The knots on the ropes weren't just tight, they were tied with a sadistic precision clearly meant to cause the maximum amount of suffering. This wasn't a poacher's trap. A poacher would have killed the animal immediately or used a standard trap, brutal, yes, but not drawn-out torture. This was punishment. A barbaric execution. But for what? Who would hate this forest predator so much? Or was it done for some perverse amusement? Thoughts swirled through her head, mixed with waves of nausea and freezing anger. She gently reached out and touched the steel chain with her gloved fingers. Even through the fabric, the cold metal burned. The chain was massive, each link as thick as a finger. It couldn't be broken by hand, and even a knife would likely be useless. She needed a special tool, and she had none. Doubts stabbed her mind like frostbitten needles. Should she interfere? This was a wild animal, a dangerous predator. Even if she managed to free him, almost impossible under these conditions, there was no guarantee he wouldn't attack her, driven mad by pain and fear. He could be injured beyond what she could see. He might even be rabid, it wasn't unheard of in such remote places. Her interference might only prolong his suffering, or worse, end in tragedy for her. But leaving him here to die such a horrifying death, that thought was unbearable. Alya imagined the life slowly draining from him, how the cold would creep over his body, extinguishing the last light in his eyes. No. She couldn't do it. She wasn't a hunter, nor a sentimental animal rights activist, but what she had witnessed went beyond any human understanding of cruelty. The wolf stirred faintly. One of his front legs, tightly bound with rope, trembled slightly, leaving a shallow groove in the snow. He made no further move, no sound. It was the twitch of despair, the last convulsion of a fading life. Alya took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady her trembling hands. The decision came on its own, pushing out fear and doubt. Slowly, so as not to startle the wolf, she reached for the pocket of her coat, where in a special compartment lay her trusted knife. Its leather-wrapped handle nestled familiarly in her palm. Her fingers closed around it, and the simple motion gave her a sliver of confidence. But she had no idea what her desperate act would bring about, what forces she might awaken with that single decision. The forest around her still held its icy silence, but now it felt ominous, tense, as if it were holding its breath before a storm. She imagined unseen eyes watching her from every dark trunk, every snowbank. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold now, but from the creeping, primal terror of the unknown, of the scene she had stumbled into. She had never been in such a situation before. Her scientific work, her expeditions, had always been about studying nature, not battling human cruelty or confronting wild, tormented beasts. The wolf moved again, barely perceptibly, and a weak, hoarse sound escaped his chest, more of a groan or a stifled sob than a growl. His huge, powerful paws, made for running through forest and snow, now lay limp against the earth, and his heavy head drooped as if he no longer had the strength to hold it up. His eyes, dark with pain and fear, were clouded over, nearly extinguished. Alya looked around again, searching for any clue as to who could have done this. The snow-covered trees stood still, like ancient, silent sentinels watching over the unfolding tragedy. The sky above darkened swiftly, turning a leaden gray. The wind, which had earlier quieted, returned with renewed strength, colder, sharper, howling through the taiga in the treetops. A mournful funeral song echoed. In the distance, barely audible, a long wolf howl rang out, then another answered it. Alya shuddered from head to toe. A pack. Could it be that those who did this were still nearby? Or were they the kin of the chained beast, mourning his fate? She looked again at the ropes binding the wolf. The knots had been tied with skill and knowledge. This wasn't some hastily made trap. Someone had bound him deliberately, carefully calculating to make him suffer as long as possible. But why? What purpose could justify such inhuman cruelty? She carefully, moving slowly and predictably, reached for one of the ropes binding the wolf's front leg. The animal jerked sharply, as much as the restraints allowed, and growled dully, baring yellowed fangs in a weak snarl. Alya instantly recoiled, her heart pounding in her throat. The wolf looked at her with clear suspicion. In his eyes glimmered primal fear and mistrust. Fear from both sides, hers and his. They were prisoners of the situation, each in their own way. Alya took several deep breaths, trying to calm herself and to pass that calm to the animal. "Easy, easy, it's okay," she whispered with her lips alone, not even understanding why she was speaking to a wild, tormented beast. But her voice, quiet and, as it seemed to her, trembling slightly, had some effect. The wolf stopped growling, though his body remained tense, like a stretched string. She tried again to touch the knot, this time a little more confidently, more slowly. The rope was wet from snow and ice, frozen through, but still incredibly strong. Untying such a knot with bare hands, even with gloves on, would be nearly impossible. She needed a knife. As soon as that thought formed in her mind, and as her hand reached for her belt again, the forest seemed to come alive. Behind her, very close, came the sharp, dry crack of a breaking branch. Alya froze instantly, chilled by a sudden sense of danger. Someone was there. She was not alone in this frozen, hostile forest. The wolf had heard the sound too. He sharply lifted his head. His ears, covered in thick fur, swiveled toward the noise. His instincts, sharpened by pain and the nearness of death, told him unmistakably a new threat was approaching, or perhaps the same one that had already condemned him. Alya slowly turned, trying not to make a sound. In the deepening twilight, which had nearly consumed the forest, something was moving among the dark silhouettes of the trees. A vague shadow, a figure that paused for a moment, then moved again, becoming more distinct. A person. There was no doubt. Her hand clenched around the knife handle so tightly that her knuckles turned white even through the glove. Her heart thundered in her chest with muffled thuds in her ears. "Who's there?" she asked, trying to sound firm and confident, but her voice came out low, tight, almost a whisper, immediately swallowed by the thick silence of the winter forest. There was no answer. But she knew, felt it with every cell in her body, that someone was there. He saw her. He was watching her. She quickly glanced down at the wolf, who also stared tensely into the darkness where the threat came from. Time was slipping away like sand through her fingers. Every second of hesitation could be fatal. She had to either free the beast now, ignoring the new arrival, or drop everything and try to flee. But something inside her, some stubborn, irrational force, would not let her abandon this tormented creature to its fate. Especially now that she knew his tormentor might be close. She knelt again beside the wolf and, no longer hiding it, took out her knife. The blade glinted coldly in the fading light of day. She feverishly began sawing at the thick frozen rope on the animal's front leg. The knife was sharp, but the ice-soaked rope resisted, slipped, snagged. Another branch snapped, this time even closer. Seconds stretched into eternity. She worked the blade with the desperation of the doomed. Her fingers were quickly going numb, even in gloves, but fear, mixed with a strange fury, gave her strength. The rope finally began to give way. The fibers snapped one by one with soft cracks. The first knot was nearly cut through. The wolf didn't move, but his breathing grew deeper, more even, as if he too felt that something was changing, that a faint hope was appearing. Alya reached for the second rope when a voice came from the darkness. "You're making a mistake." She froze. The knife halted midway to the next knot. The voice was male, low, hoarse, as if the speaker hadn't spoken in a long time or had a badly sore throat. It came from the same darkness where she had felt eyes watching her, but it was impossible to tell the direction. The sound bounced off the trees, wandered through the frosty air. Alya slowly raised her head, trying to make out the speaker. The shadow among the trees moved again, took a few steps forward, and for a moment, the moonlight breaking through sparse clouds lit up his vague outline. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in dark, heavy clothing. "Who are you?" she asked again. This time her voice was slightly louder, though a betraying tremble still clung to it. Again, silence. Heavy, oppressive. Goosebumps crawled over her skin, and it wasn't from the cold. The man stood motionless, but Alya had no doubt he was looking directly at her, assessing her, weighing her. The wolf beside her let out a soft, plaintive sound, almost a whimper, and tried to burrow deeper into the snow as much as the remaining bindings allowed. Alya gripped the knife handle tighter, bracing for the worst. "That beast is not your concern," the stranger continued in the same flat, emotionless tone. "Leave it. Walk away while you still can." His words, though spoken without visible threat, carried a hidden danger that made Alya feel ice bloom inside her chest. She didn't move. Leaving now would mean betraying not just the helpless wolf, but herself, her principles. "Who tied him here?" she asked directly, looking toward where the man stood. Again, only silence, broken by the wind in the branches and her own quickened breathing. Her heart pounded, ready to burst from her chest. Thoughts raced through her mind. Was he a hunter? A sadist eliminating a rival? A poacher afraid she would report him? Her breath hitched. What if this man wasn't just a bystander? What if he had been waiting for her? What if this was all some horrible, incomprehensible game, and she had a role to play? "I'm not leaving," Alya said, trying to make her voice sound as firm and determined as possible, though inside she was trembling with fear. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something terrible, irreversible. "Then you'll stay here forever," the man said. And this time, his voice carried openly menacing notes. He stepped out of the trees onto a small patch of moonlit ground. Alya could see him more clearly now. He wore a dark, weathered jacket with a high collar, a fur-lined trapper's hat pulled low over his brow. His face was windburned, deeply lined, with a long, disfiguring scar running across his left cheek, making his expression even more severe. But it was his eyes that were the most terrifying, cold, empty, devoid of the slightest spark of human warmth or compassion. In them gleamed only the icy light of the moon and an abyss of all-consuming emptiness. Fear filled Alya like freezing water, paralyzing her, locking her in place. But with that fear rose another powerful emotion, a dull, burning fury. It was him. He had done this. He had chained the wolf and left it to die in agony. She knew it the moment she saw his eyes. There was no surprise, no curiosity in them, only that same cold indifference with which the worst atrocities are carried out. She quickly glanced at the wolf. The last rope, binding his hind leg, was still untouched. She had to hurry. She bent sharply, grabbed the knife again, but then the man made a sudden, aggressive movement forward, closing the distance. "Don't you dare," he roared, his voice cracking into a deafening scream. At the same time, he thrust his hand into a deep pocket and pulled out something long and dark, a weapon. Alya didn't wait to see it in action. Her survival instinct, sharpened to the limit, kicked in. She yanked the knife forcefully, slicing through the final strands of the cursed rope. The wolf, sensing freedom, surged forward with incredible strength for his weakened state, dragging the still dangling chain from his neck. At that same moment, a shot rang out. The blast shattered the icy silence of the forest, echoing between the trees and sending a cloud of startled crows bursting from the nearby pines. Alya instinctively squeezed her eyes shut and fell into the snow, bracing for the searing pain of the bullet that would end her life. Her heart froze for a moment, then began to pound again, wildly, as if counting down her final seconds. It felt like only a second had passed. But nothing happened. No pain, no impact. Only the cold snow stung her cheek and slipped under the collar of her coat. Slowly, with immense effort, she forced herself to open her eyes. In front of her, shielding her from the man with the gun, stood the wolf. His massive, though emaciated, body was tensed like a steel spring. The fur on his scruff bristled, revealing powerful muscles. He hadn't fallen. He hadn't been wounded. The bullet had clearly missed, only kicking up a small fountain of snow near him. Or maybe, by some miracle, he had managed to dodge at the last moment. The man with the gun cursed through clenched teeth and raised his weapon again, aiming more carefully this time. No, Alya exhaled, realizing that this time he wouldn't miss. The second bullet would inevitably find its mark. But at that very moment, the wolf growled. It wasn't the growl of a wounded or frightened animal. It was a sound that came from the deepest recesses of his wild soul, a sound of primal fury and an indomitable will to live. A sound so powerful it seemed the very air in the forest thickened and became heavy. Even Alya, standing right beside him, felt a chill crawl down her spine at that terrifying, blood-freezing growl. She saw something flicker in the man's eyes, hesitation, uncertainty. For one brief, infinitely long second, he faltered. His finger froze on the trigger. That 1 second was enough. With incredible speed, impossible to expect from such a large and exhausted animal, the wolf lunged at his tormentor. The man had no time to react, no time to fire, not even time to retreat. The giant gray body crashed into him with the force of a small truck. There was a dull thud, a short cry, and the rifle flew from the man's weakened hands, landing far off in a deep snowdrift. The man himself, knocked to the ground, tumbled through the snow like a limp rag doll. Alya still sat on the ground, unable to move, not believing what she saw. The wolf, he had protected her. But it was impossible. He was a wild animal, driven to the brink by human cruelty. He should have feared people, hated them. Why had he attacked the man and not her, who was much closer? There was no time for questions or reasoning now. The man groaned in pain and slowly got to his hands and knees. His face twisted in a grimace of fear and rage. He looked around frantically, trying to find his weapon, but it had vanished somewhere in the snow. His hands trembled. He was clearly disoriented and afraid. Alya realized that if he got to the rifle again, he wouldn't aim at the wolf, he would shoot her. She jumped to her feet, ready to either flee or somehow help the wolf. Though what help could she offer against an armed, if temporarily disarmed, man? But her intervention was not needed. At the very moment the man almost reached the dark outline of the rifle in the snow, the wolf struck again. This time it wasn't just a body slam. A powerful paw, claws as sharp as razors extended, flashed through the air and came down on the man's shoulder. There was a sickening rip of fabric and a wet, dull sound that made Alya's blood freeze in her veins. The man screamed, a wild, primal scream filled with unbearable pain and animalistic terror. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his shredded shoulder. From beneath his fingers, thick dark blood gushed onto the white snow. His face, moments ago twisted in rage, was now contorted in horror and the dawning realization of helplessness. "Stop him, he screamed, looking straight at Alya with wild, bulging eyes. "Which? You sicked him on me." "Stop him," I said. Alya stood frozen, unable to utter a single word. Stop him? She was supposed to stop the creature that had just saved her life, that was avenging its own inhuman suffering? The man was terrified, this man who, without hesitation or mercy, had sentenced a living being to slow, agonizing death, and only moments ago had been ready to kill her too. Now he was afraid. Afraid of her. He called her a witch. And suddenly, like an echo from moments before, his words came back to her, "You're making a mistake. This beast is not your concern. You will stay here forever." Back then, his voice had been confident, commanding, filled with the assurance of power and impunity. Now it held nothing but panic and pathetic pleading. Alya took a slow step back, retreating from the horrifying scene. She had no intention of stopping anything. Let justice be done, wild, primal justice, perhaps the only kind that was truly fair in this moment. "Let fate decide who among you survives," she whispered softly, though she knew the man could no longer hear her. He seemed to understand her intent without words. In his eyes, which had just been filled with pain and fear, a deeper, all-consuming horror now appeared, the terror of inevitable death. No, please, don't," he babbled, trying to crawl away, to push himself back from the wolf looming above him. But his movements were weak and unsteady. Blood kept gushing from his torn shoulder, staining the snow crimson. It was too late for begging. Too late for remorse. The wolf, as if savoring the moment, or perhaps gathering the last of his strength, slowly rose to his hind legs, towering over his fallen victim. His silhouette against the darkening sky and snow-covered trees looked especially fearsome and ominous. In that moment, he didn't seem like just an animal, but something ancient, a forest spirit, the embodiment of nature's vengeance for a desecrated life. Alya turned away. She didn't want to see what would happen next. She was neither judge nor executioner. But she had no desire to save this man either. She heard no more gunshots. Only one short, cut-off scream, full of inhuman agony, and then a dull, heavy thud, and a gruesome, wet growl. And then, silence. Absolute, dead silence. Even more terrifying than all the sounds that came before it. What now? What happens next? Alya stood motionless, afraid to move, afraid to turn around. Her heart still pounded in her throat, and nausea rose inside her. Finally, summoning all her will, she turned, very slowly. The wolf stood in the middle of the small clearing, breathing heavily. The snow around him was splattered thickly with blood. Of the man, there was almost nothing left, just shredded scraps of dark clothing, a few dark stains quickly soaking into the snow, and the discarded rifle lying in a drift. The wolf, he was looking at her again. His amber eyes burned with a ghostly fire in the half-light of the forest. Alya felt her fingers involuntarily clench into fists. She waited for him, now that he had dealt with his main enemy, to attack her. After all, she was still a human, a representative of the species that had caused him such suffering. But he simply stood and looked at her. For several long seconds, they stared at each other in silence. In his gaze there was no more rage, no threat, only a deep, incomprehensible exhaustion and something else. Something Alya couldn't define, but which made her heart ache with a strange, aching sorrow. Then the wolf slowly turned, and without another sound or growl, glided almost silently into the depths of the darkening forest. His gray silhouette flickered for just a moment between the tree trunks. The wolf vanished into the night mist, leaving her alone in this blood-soaked, frozen world of horror. Alya exhaled heavily, feeling her knees give way beneath her. Was it over, or had something just begun? She didn't know who had saved whom that dreadful night. She stood in the middle of the snow-covered forest, alone, breathing heavily. The silence that fell over the clearing after the wolf's departure felt unnatural and oppressive, as if nature itself had held its breath, stunned by what had occurred. The man was gone, and so was the wolf. Only she, Alya, remained, and the cold, indifferent forest that had silently witnessed the bloody drama. Her fingers, now unclenched, were trembling, whether from the piercing cold, which she felt with renewed intensity now that the adrenaline had worn off, or from the lingering shock still surging through her blood. The snow beneath her feet was stained with dark, nearly black splotches, already being covered by a fine, sharp snow falling again from the darkening sky, as if nature hurried to conceal the traces of tragedy. She took one unsteady step forward, then another. Her legs felt like cotton, unresponsive. At some point, she realized she could no longer stand, her strength had finally left her. She collapsed to her knees in the bloody snow, feeling neither the cold nor disgust. A crushing weight pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. What had she just done, or rather, what had she not done? She had freed the wolf, yes, but she had also allowed the man to die. She had stood and watched as a wild animal carried out its vengeance. Maybe she herself had committed murder, not with her own hands, but with the hands of nature, of the one she had released. Her thoughts rushed chaotically through her mind like shards of broken glass. Her eyes darted feverishly across the dark, snow-laden forest, as if searching for proof that all this was real, that it wasn't a nightmarish hallucination. But all she saw was silent, snowbound emptiness, indifferent to her turmoil and terror. It had all begun so simply, so routinely. She had come here by chance, following her research program. She'd heard a sound, followed it out of a mix of curiosity and scientific instinct. She hadn't even known what she was doing when she decided to cut the ropes. Some inner force, a sharpened sense of justice, or perhaps just basic human compassion, had compelled her to stay, to intervene, to risk her own life. Who was that man? Why was he so cruel? Why had he threatened her so confidently, as if he were the master of this forest, the master of life and death? And why had he been so terrified of her in the end? Why had he called her a witch? The memory of his final moments, his words, his eyes full of animal fear, kept surfacing in her mind. You're making a mistake. This beast is not your concern. You will stay here forever. What if he knew her? What if this wasn't their first encounter, only she didn't remember? What if she had been in situations like this before, freeing other wolves or other animals from other tormentors? But why couldn't she recall any of it? Was her memory playing cruel tricks on her, or was it something else, something beyond normal understanding? Alya, horrified, clutched her head with both hands, trying to drive away these delirious, frightening thoughts. What if nothing was as it seemed? What if this forest, this wolf, this man, were all links in some chain of events she couldn't begin to comprehend? She forced herself to take a deep breath. Then another. She had to pull herself together. She had to get out of here. The forest, which had recently seemed so hostile and frightening, now felt strangely calm, almost peaceful, as if something important had just happened, as if some ancient balance had been restored. She stood up, brushed the snow from her clothes, and looked in the direction the wolf had gone. His tracks, clear and deep, disappeared into the thick woods. But she walked the other way, back to the snowmobile, back to the road, to people, to civilization. Several hours later, at dawn, exhausted, frozen, and with a hollow, detached gaze, Alya stepped onto a narrow forest road buried in snow. She was noticed almost immediately by logging truck drivers who happened to be passing through. They stopped, startled and alarmed by the sight of a lone woman wandering along the deserted road. They asked what had happened, if she was all right. Alya didn't know what to say. She couldn't tell them the truth. Who would believe her? They'd think she was insane. So she lied. She said her snowmobile had broken down, that she got lost and wandered for hours. The men believed her, or pretended to. They helped her into the warm cab, gave her hot tea from a thermos, and wrapped her in an old coat smelling of diesel. But even when she was brought to the nearest village, even when she sat safely in the warmth, something inside her would not let go. She couldn't forget the wolf's eyes. She couldn't forget the man's eyes. And she couldn't shake the feeling that all of this had happened before, days, years earlier, in some other life, or in a forgotten dream. A few days later, when the first shock had worn off, when she had started to regain her strength and even tried to return to her usual scientific work, Alya realized she couldn't just erase that night from her memory. The forest called to her, persistently, relentlessly. She didn't plan to return to the deep, terrifying thicket, but something unexplained, some invisible force, drew her to its edge. And one day, giving in to this strange pull, she found herself again at the edge of that very forest. In daylight, it looked different, less sinister, yet still full of secrets and hidden dangers. She stood at the tree line, unable to take a single step forward, just gazing at the dark wall of pines and firs, at the white snow caps, at the still, frozen branches. And then, in the tense silence, she heard a sound. It wasn't the crack of a branch or the rustle of wind. It was a howl, long, wild, slightly mournful, yet filled with primal strength. It came from deep within the forest, from the place where the wolf had disappeared. Alya froze, and a shiver ran down her spine again. It was him. She felt it with every fiber of her being. The wolf was still there. He hadn't gone far. Perhaps he was watching her even now, hidden somewhere among the trees. Perhaps he had known she would come. The woman exhaled slowly, a puff of steam escaping into the frosty air. She wasn't sure who had saved whom that dreadful night, her or him. She didn't know whether their meeting had been chance or destined by some higher, unknowable force. But one thing she knew with absolute certainty: this story was not over. Something unseen had bound her to this forest, to this wolf, and that bond was stronger than any chain or rope. Perhaps it was her fate to discover what lay behind the mystery of that night, who that cruel man truly was, and why it was she who had been chosen to witness and take part in these events. The forest kept its secrets, and perhaps one day it would reveal them to her. But for now, she simply stood and listened as, in the icy air, there echoed a howl ancient as the world itself, a wolf's howl, promising either another meeting or new, even more harrowing trials.